Mr. Bach, thank you so much for joining us. You are a former Olympic fencer and won the gold medal in 1976 at the Summer Olympics. As a young athlete, did you ever imagine that the Olympic movement would become so big and that you would play a major part in it?
No, not at all. At this time, and as an athlete, you don't really care so much what is happening around you. You're concentrated on your competition, and if everything is going well, it's fine. And if it's not going so well, then you have still time to blame the officials.
The Agenda 2020 is a major reform program that was one of your main initiatives as well. Now, with this roadmap, do you think that the reforms are on track?
Definitely we are on track with these reforms. We can see most of the reforms already being implemented from the Olympic channel over good governance measures, a new procedure for the selection of host cities, more feasible and more sustainable Olympic Games, more young and urban sports in the program of the Games, and many others more women in leadership functions, and with gender equality already being achieved at the next Youth Olympic Games. So within these 4 years, many things happened.
These are all very crucial reforms. Which are the biggest challenges in the way for their implementation?
The biggest challenges are to make people believe that the reforms are really bearing fruit, and to get this message across. The other big challenge for the Olympic movement is to keep its political neutrality and not to be torn into political disputes, and therefore we must always preserve our autonomy and the political neutrality. And the other big challenge is to keep the athletes at the heart of the Olympic movement, and to make sure that the sports competitions are in clean competitions, and that good governance measures are also applied not only in the IOC but across the Olympic movement.
Voters in the canton of Valais here in Switzerland, they rejected the bid to host the 2026 Winter Olympics. They were mainly worried about the high costs of hosting such an event. Do you blame them?
No, we are not blaming them. This is a referendum, this is a democratic procedure. We respect this, even if we would have wished that the arguments of the responsible people who were bringing this candidature forward would have been heard a little bit better, because there the Olympic agenda played an important role and plays an important role. And what is a little bit a pity maybe is that the emotions around the Olympic Games, the magic of the Olympic Games, the support for the Swiss athletes, that all this did not play a real role. And this is at the end what the Games are about. They're about the athletes, they're about this magic, they're about the emotions, they're about excellence, they're about being good hosts. And all this was reduced to a financial question, and not discussed in a way which really reflected all the options the Olympic agenda is offering.
Especially because the IOC is headquartered here in Lausanne. Do you miss the people's support from time to time, and the enthusiasm of the locals?
No, they're the locals. I think we cannot complain. We feel here in Lausanne, we feel very well received. We feel at home here, and the people are extremely friendly. But sometimes it's also, that the prophet in their own country is not the most popular, and this is maybe what also happened in Valais. at least some of the cities in the Valais.
There's also a debate in Switzerland and in Valais that there was a lack of trust in the IOC. What is your response?
I think this discussion took place more in some media than among the population. We have seen the polls, and we have had always contact there with the candidature committee. And there we were told that it was 3 topics which played a role. The first one was money, the second was money, and the third was money. And but even with respect to money, the IOC has a lot to offer because we are contributing to the success of Olympic Winter Games with about 1 billion, to be precise, 925 million US dollars.
One of your many duties include the response to doping scandals, including the Russian state-sponsored doping scandal that we have seen. Do you think that countries have learned their lessons?
I hope so, that they have learned their lessons, and that they have seen that the IOC is taking a tough position. We excluded Russia from the Olympic Winter Games in Pyeongchang. This is the toughest sanction we can impose there on a National Olympic Committee. And now we have seen many reforms in Russia in the anti-doping system. I hope that they will bear fruit, and I hope that this will have a deterrent effect on all those who may consider to support such a system, but I have no indication that it's happening in this way. But doping will always happen. This is one of the wars you cannot win.
Given that this is a war that you can never win, are you planning to put into place stricter anti-doping measures?
No, this is up to the World Anti-Doping Agency. The IOC has only the responsibility there to have the doping tests and the sanctions on the occasion of the Olympic Games.
How close is your cooperation with the agency, and should it be strengthened?
Now there we were the first sport organization who made the testing and the sanctioning completely independent from the IOC. We have initiated the founding of an own testing agency, the International Testing Agency, and we have delegated all the sanctioning to the Court of Arbitration for Sport. And we hope that now more and more international sports federations will follow this example. So to make it very clear that there cannot even be the perception of a conflict of interest.
Now, the world's biggest sports institutions and federations, they've been hit by corruption scandals as well. What kind of new measures are you planning to embark on when it comes to tackling corruption?
As part of the Olympic Agenda 2020, we have established a series of measures with regard to prevention, to then new regulations. We have very strict regulations, for instance, when it comes to candidate cities where IOC members are not even allowed to visit a candidate city, where you have then also internal auditing and control mechanisms, and where we have an ethics commission which is monitoring all this, and this ethics commission is presided by the former Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Ban Ki-moon. But we also know that you have always to adapt. And this is why, for instance, immediately after the implementation of the reforms of Olympic Agenda 2020, we asked an international management institute already to give us advice how we can even go further And in the meantime, we're establishing these recommendations already. So it's always and will always be a work in progress.
Let's talk about money as well, because we are CNNMoney Switzerland, Mr. Bach. So let's talk about your budget for this year and then going into 2019.
We have to count always in 4 years terms because our budgets are determined by the Olympic Games. So one 4 years term, the Olympiad, is our budgeting time, and there we hope that, and we are pretty sure, given the success we enjoy on the marketing front and on the TV front, that during this Olympiad, means from 2017 to 2020, that we will exceed the revenues of $6 billion. US dollars, 90% of which are going directly back to sport. So this is from where you can see that we are a non-for-profit organization because that we are investing in the development of sport in all parts of the world and in supporting athletes from all over the world.
Now, for the 2020 Tokyo Olympic Games, for example, the IOC slashed the initial budget by $2.5 billion US dollars. Are there any more such budget cuts in the pipeline?
We are offering there a lot of possibilities for organizing committees to cut the budgets, and as one of the implementation measures of Olympic Agenda 2020, we have made more proposals and recommendations, what we are calling the new norm. And applying this new norm can lead to a budget cut, additional budget cuts of about a potential of about $1 billion US dollars more. But speaking of Tokyo, you always have to take into consideration that you cannot speak only of expenditures. You also have to speak about the revenues. And there you see that Tokyo will achieve the most successful, and by far the most successful, marketing program in the Olympic history. And that Tokyo will enjoy the support of the IOC with about 1.6 billion US dollars. So there you can see that organizing the Olympic Games is feasible in investment, and there Pyeongchang 2018 you will hear in the near future that there the budget will again be make a profit.
Now, looking at the long term, and also because the IOC is a non-profit organization, are the cash reserves enough for the next decade, 2 decades to come?
No, we are not so ambitious to have cash reserves for 2 decades. What we try to have are reserves which could make us surviving the cancellation of an Olympic Games.
Is this always a very high probability for you?
No, it's not a high probability, but in our fragile world, you never know what's going to happen. And you may remember the discussions about the Olympic Winter Games in Pyeongchang, Korea, when the missile tests were taking place, when there was the threat of a military strike.
How close did we get there to a cancellation of the Games?
Very close.
Like almost?
Very close, because you know, for cancellation of the Games, the threshold is not military action. The threshold is that one country would say, we are not going because we cannot, or we do not see there the safety and security of our athletes being guaranteed. And there the discussions were not always very easy, to say it diplomatically.
Now, you met with North Korean leader Kim Jongun at the Games in Pyeongchang. You had a meeting of about 30 minutes there. Critics said that North Korea's participation in the Games was a charm offensive. Now, in retrospect, how successful did you think that the Games were in terms of easing the tensions?
Well, if a charm offensive leads to peace negotiations, every charm offensive in this world is welcome by the IOC, and this is what in fact we managed there with the actions during the Olympic Winter Games and the actions we took before, because there the joint march of the two Korean teams, the joint women's ice hockey team, they opened the door for the peace talks which were following, and there then the politicians were walking through this open door, and this is why we are extremely happy with this achievement, and why we are very satisfied that these talks are going on, and that since then the tensions on the Korean Peninsula are much lower than even the day before the Olympic Winter Games.
Let's talk about the future of sports. And eSports is a booming market worth some $1 billion a year, and some 250 million players are practicing the games online around the world. What do you think about eSports and video games as a sport?
It's obviously a very growing phenomenon, and this is why we established a dialogue with the esports industry.
Are you practicing yourself already?
I tried a little bit, but I must admit it was more passion than performance there at the time. But we see the development. We see the differences, and we are looking for things we may have in common. And the differences are pretty clear. We have on the one hand an industry, a profit-oriented industry, and we have on the other hand a values-based, non-for-profit organization. And to bring this together is not easy. You have on the one hand in the esports, you have a very fragmented market also, so that we realized when we invited them for a dialogue, for a forum, that most of them among themselves met for the first time. And on the other hand, we also have the discussion whether it is sports and what is the definition of sports in this respect.
eSport will be a medal event in the 2022 Asian Games. Did you feel a bit pressured?
There you know more than I do.
Did you feel the pressure to include it into the Olympic Games as well?
Oh, there were always some voices asking for this. There are other voices on both sides who say at least it's too early or it will never come together. So this is why we have to watch this market very closely, because we also do not know whether the e-games in the form we know it today will still exist in 5 years' time, or whether then VR games will have taken over, and this would be a completely new phenomenon.
What would you think about VR games being included in the Olympic Games?
VR games can be closer to the definition of sports and to the Olympic movement.
Why?
Because it may include movements. You know, I was playing there a couple of days ago VR tennis. And this is at the very early stages, you know, it was serve and return. But you had at least already to return some physical activity, and I'm sure that this development will continue, and that then maybe one day you can in the virtual world play against Roger Federer. It would be very one-sided, but...
What new disciplines are you planning to embrace?
First of all, we are very happy with the younger audience. All our statistics, our figures show that the games are very popular among the youth, and that there on the digital platforms they are following the Olympic Games with great excitement. But we have to keep this interest alive. And this is why we took two major measures. The one was the establishment of the Olympic Channel, which we discussed. The other one is the introduction of new, younger sports to the program of the Games. This includes climbing, this includes surfing, this includes skateboarding, this includes karate, this includes 3x3 basketball and many more mixed events which are very popular among the younger population. And we see the fruits of these efforts, because the organizing committees are happy and the young generation is really with us.
Gender equality is another big topic. How are you planning to include more female IOC members, and why don't you order gender equality right away?
Oh, we have included already many more IOC members, women. We have in the commissions, for instance, we have increased the women's participation by more than 60% in the last 4 years. We're also doing so on the membership, but there we are facing one challenge because a part of our membership is coming from the National Olympic Committees and another part from the international federations. And and this should be the presidents of these organizations. And there is still a clear lack of women. But we have now in the Youth Olympic Games in Buenos Aires, we will have full gender equality, 50%. And in Tokyo, we will also have achieved it, even if it's not the 50-50, but it will be 48.7% of women. So we are making good progress in this respect.
Another big debate is around transgender athletes, and the IOC ruled that transgender athletes do not have to undergo sex reassignment surgery anymore. What is your view on the transgender theme?
Now, this is the eligibility of athletes is in the hands of the international federations. They are governing their sport. So we are respecting, and we have to respect what the international federations are doing in this respect.
A lot of times the venues, for example in Athens or Rio, they're not used anymore after an Olympic game and could be better used, and of course the money better spent. What is your position on that? How can the venues be better used in the long term?
We could now enter into a long discussion which facilities are used or are allegedly not used there.
In a couple of sentences.
The storytelling is not always reflecting reality, but we have anyway, we have turned the page in this respect, and we make it now obligatory for every city which wants to be candidate for the Olympic Games to present a sustainability plan from the very beginning of the candidature. And then we are following this up during all the candidature phase. So this is one of the reforms we have been undertaking.
Lausanne here was elected to host the 2020 Winter Youth Olympics. What is your short message to the young athletes that will participate in this event?
that they should feel very much welcomed in the Olympic capital, and that they can be sure that the people of Lausanne and also the IOC are looking forward to seeing them here and to celebrate really youth Olympic Winter Games, not just to compete but to celebrate them in a great Olympic spirit, supported by the people of Lausanne and by their own people who hopefully will come here to cheer them up.
Before we go, Mr. Bach, how would you define the Olympic spirit today?
The Olympic spirit today is more important than ever, I think, because we are living in a very fragile world, and the Olympic Games are maybe the only event in this world which still manages to get the whole world together. You have 206 national Olympic committees in one place at the same time, and the athletes are competing with each other but living at the same time in the Olympic Village together under one roof, and this without any kind of discrimination regardless of any of the background, be it political or religious or sexual orientation or whatever. And I think this unifying power of the Olympic spirit we need more than ever, because we see that the world becomes more and more egocentric, that it's more and more individualization, and therefore we are happy that we can still present this unity in all the diversity of humanity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bach, for your time, and good luck for the next games.
Thank you very much. Great pleasure.